By noon, my own phone buzzed like a hive of angry bees. By evening, I was suddenly the most talked about woman in Connecticut, and all it took was shattering my family's expectations. My name is Nora Whitaker. I am 64 years old, a widow, and for most of my life, a bookkeeper for small local businesses. Numbers always made sense to me, people less so. After my husband passed, I was supposed to become fragile, predictable, and dependent. At least, that is how my family treated me. But what they never expected was that I would take control of my own life in the most dramatic way they could imagine. This is not a story about money, it is a story about dignity, about remembering who you are when others have spent years convincing you that you are smaller than you really are. For 6 years in a row, my birthday landed on the same familiar battlefield. March 15th, the day I came into this world, always collided with March 12th, the day belonging to Lorraine Pierce, my daughter-in-law's mother. And somehow, every year, Lorraine's needs managed to overshadow my own. It started small. Year 1, Lorraine fell and broke her hip just 3 days before my birthday. My son Ethan and his wife Leela rushed off to Vermont to be by her side. Family emergency, unavoidable. We'll celebrate when we get back, they promised. Except we never did. Year 2, another crisis. Chest pains, panic, a whirlwind trip. Later it turned out to be nothing more than too much caffeine, but by then my birthday was a footnote, left behind like an unopened card. Years 3 and 4 followed the same rhythm. Some kind of urgent issue, another hasty departure, and me left alone with a grocery store cake and a polite text message. But it was year 5 that broke the illusion. I caught them at a bistro the day after my birthday, laughing with Lorraine over champagne. The same Lorraine who was supposedly bedridden with vertigo. That was when I realized the pattern was no coincidence. It was a choice. Ethan had chosen peace with his wife and her mother over showing up for his own. And in that moment I understood that if I didn't change something, nothing would ever change for me. When the 6th March rolled around, I decided to do something different. No reminders. No hints. No guilt trips. I simply smiled when Ethan and Lila mentioned their weekend trip to Vermont for Lorraine's birthday. I waved from the porch as their car pulled out of the driveway, my silence saying more than words ever could. The moment they were gone, I picked up the phone and called my realtor Kelsey Tran. Find me the most beautiful waterfront property within 50 miles, I told her. Money is no object. She hesitated, thinking I was joking. But 4 hours later, as we stood in the marble foyer of a sleek villa overlooking Long Island Sound, she realized I wasn't. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened to endless water views. The kitchen gleamed with appliances worth more than most cars. A master suite with its own fireplace looked out across the horizon. It's $3.2 million, Kelsey said carefully, as though delivering bad news. I'll take it, I replied without missing a beat. She blinked. Don't you want to think about it? Maybe discuss it with your family? I nearly laughed. When was the last time my family discussed anything with me? Wire the funds tomorrow. By the next afternoon, the deed was mine, and for the first time in years, so was my sense of independence. The morning after the purchase, I unpacked a few boxes and decided to celebrate quietly. I snapped photos of the villa, the sun-drenched living room, the expansive kitchen island where I placed a single glass of champagne, the deck where I ate takeout from the finest restaurant in town. I posted them on every social platform I could still remember the passwords to. My caption was simple: birthday celebrations at my new home. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones you give yourself. The first call came 5 minutes after my son's banking app would have sent him an alert. Ethan's name flashed across my screen at 10:52 a.m. I let it ring. At 11:15, Lila called. At 11:43, Lorraine herself. By lunchtime, I had 12 missed calls, and by dinner, more than 20. Text messages piled in: concern, confusion, panic. My favorite came from Lila: Mom Whitaker, this isn't like you. Please call so we know you're okay. Isn't like me. That was the point. For years they had known only the version of me who stayed quiet, convenient, and predictable. Now they were about to meet the real Nora Whitaker, independent, decisive, and finally unwilling to be invisible. What none of them knew, what not one of them had bothered to ask about in all the years since my husband died, was Aunt Evelyn. Evelyn Hart, my father's sister, the one who chose career over marriage back when that was considered scandalous. To most of my family she barely existed. Ethan met her twice in his entire life. Lila shook her hand at our wedding and promptly forgot her name. But to me, Evelyn was more than an aunt. She was a friend. Every other month I drove to Boston to visit her brownstone. We went to museums, lingered in cafes, and walked the public garden in every season. She was sharp, unapologetic, and lived entirely on her own terms. When pancreatic cancer took hold, I sat beside her through treatments, and eventually, through her final days. Ethan and Lila sent flowers to the funeral. They couldn't rearrange their Napa wine tasting trip. After the service, her attorney, Nolan Briggs, handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was Evelyn's precise handwriting. "Dearest Nora, I've left you everything. Not because you are my only family, but because you are the only one who saw me as more than an obligation. You deserve to live boldly, not managed." Her estate was staggering: a brownstone worth $1.8 million, an investment portfolio valued at $4.2 million, and an art collection appraised at $1.3 million. After taxes and fees, I inherited $7.3 million. Enough to change the trajectory of my life completely. For 6 months, I kept it to myself, watching how my family treated me when they thought I had nothing but modest savings. The villa was not an impulse. It was the first deliberate step toward living the life Aunt Evelyn had urged me to embrace. Saturday morning came sooner than expected. At 7:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. Through the tall glass panes of my foyer, I saw Ethan standing there, wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, looking like a man who had driven through the night. The moment I opened the door, he said, "We need to talk." No greeting, no smile, just urgency. I led him into the kitchen and busied myself with the coffee maker. He watched every detail of the villa, as though cataloging signs of my supposed instability. "Mom, this is insane," he blurted. "You can't just buy a $3.2 million house without talking to anyone. What were you thinking?" I measured the ground slowly, then answered, "I was thinking I am a grown woman with my own money." "Cream in your coffee?" He bristled. "Don't joke. This is serious. Do you realize the property taxes alone?" $32,000 annually, I interrupted, calm as the morning sun. "Already budgeted." His jaw tightened. "How could you possibly budget for that? Dad's life insurance was $400,000. Even with savings, you don't have this kind of money." I set the mugs down, met his eyes, and said evenly, "Ethan, you've been watching my withdrawals, not my income. There are things about my finances you don't know, and it's time you learned." 2 days later, the front door opened again, this time to Leela and her mother, Lorraine. They arrived at 8 in the morning, carrying folders, glossy brochures, and expressions of grim determination. It looked less like a family visit and more like an intervention. Lorraine settled herself at my kitchen island as if she owned the place. "Nora," she began in that syrupy voice she used when she was about to deliver judgment, "we need to discuss what's really going on here." "What's going on?" I replied, pouring coffee, "is that I bought a house. Would you like cream?" She ignored the question and slid the brochures across the counter. "These are active adult communities: Heritage Oaks, Sunnybrook, Golden Years. Safe, social, with built-in support systems, much more suitable than this oversized property." Lila added quickly, "We're worried. This purchase feels impulsive, secretive. You've been pulling away from family activities. That's not like you." I looked at the cheerful photos of silver-haired couples playing board games and smiled faintly. "I'm 64, not 94. I don't need guided living, and I don't need a committee to supervise my choices." Lorraine's patience cracked. "You're being irresponsible. Your family depends on you to act reasonably." I pushed the brochures back across the counter. "No, Lorraine, what I need is for my family to respect that my life is my own." A week later, I finally faced the task I had been avoiding for 3 years, sorting through my late husband's desk. Tucked behind outdated appliance manuals, I found a manila folder labeled in his careful handwriting, "Ethan, private." My stomach sank before I even opened it. Inside were bank statements, loan applications, and signed documents, except the signatures weren't mine, though they were meant to look like it. Ethan had forged my name. He had taken out a second mortgage on his house with me listed as co-signer. He had opened credit cards in my name. Altogether, the debts were staggering. Nearly $50,000 in balances, months of unpaid bills, and looming foreclosure notices. As I flipped through the dates, a sickening realization formed. Every financial crisis matched perfectly with one of Lorraine's so-called emergencies. Each sudden trip to Vermont, each postponed birthday, lined up with the months when Ethan's finances were collapsing. I sat back in the chair that once belonged to my husband, the folder heavy in my lap. My son, the boy I had raised to be careful, honest, responsible, was now drowning in debt and deception. But worse than the money was the betrayal. He had stolen my name, my credit, and my trust. And I could no longer pretend not to see it. I called Nolan Briggs, the attorney who had managed Aunt Evelyn's estate. My voice was steady, but inside I felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. "Nolan," I said, "I need you to run a background check. The name is Lorraine Pierce." There was a pause on the line, then the sound of his pen scratching. "Any particular reason?" he asked. "Because I think she has been running a con on my family." By evening, Nolan called back with results that confirmed my worst fears. Lorraine Pierce wasn't Lorraine Pierce at all. Her real name was Lorraine Warren, and her past was littered with fraud charges. Florida, 2018 elder exploitation. North Carolina, 2015 insurance fraud. Both cases had slipped through the cracks, dismissed on technicalities or plea bargains. But the pattern was undeniable. She targeted families with aging parents, wove herself into their lives, then drained them financially through a series of carefully staged crises. The more I listened, the colder I felt. Nolan read off addresses, phone numbers, aliases. Lorraine's life was a trail of abandoned households and broken trust. "She's good at what she does," Nolan said quietly. "Professional, patient, deliberate. Families rarely see her coming." I hung up the phone and sat in silence, staring out at the dark water beyond my windows. Lorraine had spent years convincing Ethan and Lila that I was fragile, someone who needed guidance and oversight. All the while, she was orchestrating the real manipulation. The emergencies, the debt, the secrecy, they all traced back to her. And now, I knew I was facing not just family disappointment, but a predator. That weekend, I accepted Ethan and Lila's invitation to dinner. The moment I walked into their house, I could feel the tension pressing in like heavy air before a storm. Lorraine wasn't there, but her shadow was. Photographs of her smiled from the mantel, and her opinions hung in every corner. We sat around the table, the roast chicken cooling between us. I waited until halfway through the meal before I asked lightly, "So how are Lorraine's treatments going?" Lila's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "She's making progress," she said carefully. "The doctors are optimistic." "Which doctors?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. "Where are the treatments taking place?" She glanced at Ethan, then back at me. "It's complicated. Sometimes in Boston, sometimes Burlington. Patricia Lorraine handles the details. You know how private she is." The vagueness hung there like smoke. Ethan's eyes narrowed just slightly, his first flicker of doubt breaking through years of blind trust. He pushed his plate away and stared at the table, silent. For once, my son wasn't rushing to defend. He was listening. And in that quiet beat, I knew a seed had been planted. Truth had begun to take root. Late one night, my security system chimed. The camera feed showed a car idling at the bottom of my driveway, headlights off. It was Lila's sedan. For several minutes she sat inside, phone pressed to her ear, her gestures sharp with frustration. Then she slipped out, moving along the side of my house toward the deck. I watched from the darkened living room, as she tugged at the sliding door. When it wouldn't budge, she dialed again, pacing with quick, anxious steps before retreating to her car and driving away. The next morning, Ethan called, his voice unsteady. "Mom, I found something." In their bedroom, tucked inside Lila's dresser drawer, was a stack of documents, bank statements, transfer records, even photographs of my insurance policies and investment files. There were notes in neat handwriting, my habits, my routines, my access to accounts, all cataloged like evidence in a case. Ethan handed me the folder with trembling hands. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Why would she keep all this?" he whispered. I had no answer that would soften the truth. The evidence was there, clear as daylight. Lila had been documenting me, not loving me, and Ethan could no longer deny it. The following day, I asked Nolan Briggs to look deeper into Lila's past. Within hours, he called me back. His tone was calm, but the words landed like blows. "Nora, your daughter-in-law is not who she says she is. Lila Grant doesn't exist, not really. Her legal name is Lila Warren." He laid it out piece by piece. The degree she'd boasted about? Forged. The company she claimed to have represented when she met Ethan? No record of her ever working there. Even her age was falsified, 38, not 32. But the most damning detail was her history. In 2015, she had been living in the very same North Carolina city where Lorraine Warren had faced charges for insurance fraud. The connection was undeniable. Lila was Lorraine's daughter. Together, they had spent years weaving a web designed to entangle my son. From the carefully timed emergencies to the staged health crisis, every move now looked like part of a deliberate plan. I sat in my kitchen, the truth settling over me like ice. My son hadn't just married the wrong woman. He had married into a long-running con, and the people we had welcomed into our lives as family were predators. It was just after sunset when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was not. "Hello, Nora," Lorraine said smoothly, as if we were old friends catching up. "Or should I call you Margaret, like on the bank forms?" My chest tightened. She knew too much. She wasted no time. "You've caused quite a mess with your lawyer and the police. That needs to stop. Here's how. You will prepare a cashier's check for $3 million. In return, I will disappear quietly, and so will certain documents about your late husband's creative tax strategies." I gripped the phone tighter. "You're bluffing." A low chuckle. "Am I? Did you ever wonder how your husband left behind such a comfortable estate? Shell companies, hidden income, questionable partnerships. I have the paperwork, Nora. If I hand it to the IRS, your reputation collapses, and Ethan could be dragged into criminal charges for signing those authorizations." My stomach churned, but my voice held steady. "And if I refuse?" "Then I release everything. Public humiliation, legal consequences, your choice." I stood at the window, looking out over the dark water. The old me might have folded, desperate to keep the family name clean. But not anymore. "I won't give you a penny," I said. "If the truth costs me, so be it. What it won't cost me is my dignity." Lorraine's voice hardened, then prepared to regret it. The moment I hung up, I called Detective Dana Morales from the State Police Financial Crimes Unit. I told her everything. She listened without interruption, then said, "We'll set a trap." The plan was straightforward. The next evening, I would take Lorraine's follow-up call with the recording device hidden beneath my blouse. Every word, every demand captured for evidence. At the same time, surveillance teams would monitor 3 possible locations where she might attempt to collect the money. The bank had already flagged her forged documents, so her access was blocked. All we needed was her voice on record, proving the blackmail. That night, as I laid the small microphone on my nightstand, I realized I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Tomorrow, Lorraine would reveal herself not just to me, but to the law. Lorraine kept her word. The very next morning, local reporters received an anonymous packet filled with documents from my late husband's business. The IRS received the same package. Suddenly, the quiet legacy my husband had left behind was under a harsh spotlight. Ethan and I spent the following weeks in attorney offices and conference rooms, combing through decades of financial records. The truth was uncomfortable. My husband had used shell companies to shelter income. The penalties were steep, nearly $2 million in back taxes and fines. But for the first time, Ethan and I faced the storm side by side. No more secrets. No more pretending everything was fine. He confessed his own mistakes, I admitted mine, and together we accepted the cost. It wasn't easy signing those checks, watching years of savings vanish. Yet strangely I felt lighter. Because this time the payment wasn't hush money to a con artist, it was the price of honesty. Lorraine thought shame would break me. Instead it bound Ethan and me closer, forging trust in a fire she had lit herself. 3 months later, Detective Morales called with the news I had been waiting for. "We found them," she said simply. Lorraine and Lila had surfaced in Mexico, living under false names and already working their next scheme on a wealthy family in Guadalajara. Mexican authorities arrested them before they could vanish again, and plans for extradition were already underway. The list of charges was long: wire fraud, identity theft, extortion, conspiracy. This time there would be no technicalities to save them. Years of evidence, including the recordings I provided, built a case too strong to ignore. If convicted, they would face decades behind bars. Not all the money was recovered, but investigators traced nearly $400,000 hidden in scattered accounts. It wasn't everything Ethan had lost, but it was enough to remind him that justice was real. When I hung up the phone, I sat on my deck, listening to the waves brush against the shore. The villa that once felt like an extravagant rebellion now stood as proof that I could survive deception, loss, and betrayal. Lorraine and Lila had built their lives on lies. Mine finally was built on truth. A year has passed since that call. I still wake each morning to the sound of waves against the rocks below my villa, and I am reminded daily that this house is more than glass and stone. It is a declaration I am not invisible. Ethan sold the house that carried too many memories of deceit and moved into a smaller home just 10 minutes away. He visits often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just for coffee on my deck. Our conversations are different now, no more guarded tones or silent judgments. Instead, we talk honestly about his struggles, my dreams, and the ways we are both learning to stand on our own 2 feet. As for me, I travel. Paris in the spring, Florence in the fall. I take art classes and let paint streak my hands. I've joined a community choir and found friends who know me simply as Nora, not mom or widow or burden. They see me for who I am now, not for what they expect me to be. Independence, I've learned, is not the same as isolation. It is the freedom to choose how you spend your days and with whom. And for the first time in decades, I feel like I am living fully, not just existing quietly in the background of someone else's story. Looking back, I see more than betrayal. I see lessons carved deep into the fabric of my life. I learned that monitoring is not the same as caring. If you love someone, you ask what they want instead of assuming you know best. I learned the power of paper trails: never co-sign, never hand over control without reading every line. And above all, I learned that dignity matters more than reputation. You cannot buy it, you cannot borrow it, and you cannot protect it by staying silent. Dignity is claimed every time you say, "This is my life and I will not be managed." So if you are listening and you feel invisible, remember this: it is never too late to stand up, to set boundaries, and to live boldly on your own terms. If my story touched something in you, then I invite you to pause and reflect. What boundary will you set this year to protect your dignity? Write it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found strength in these words, don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend who might need it, and subscribe to our channel, The Art of Revenge. Every story here is a reminder that you are not alone, that your voice matters, and that standing up for yourself is never the wrong choice. This is not just about me, it is about all of us who have ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. Together we can build a community where courage is celebrated and respect is non-negotiable.